Welcome back to Synergy Bonus, coming at you with another single-player episode tonight. I'm going to be talking about an old game on the Nintendo Entertainment System from 1990, Crystalis, or if you're part of the Japanese crowd, Godslayer Sonata of the Faraway Sky. Quite the mouthful. This is a top-down action-adventure RPG that, if you've been exposed to it before, you probably know as that weird Legend of Zelda clone. This is a bit of a cult classic. It never really took off in its time, although it did earn a space in the issue 100 of Nintendo Power as one of the top 100 games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. So it does have some chops to it. The plot of this game is fairly simple and straightforward. You're a little nameless hero who wakes up in a cave surrounded by all this weird machinery, and you have no idea who you are or what your name is or what's going on. So naturally you exit the cave and then you go to the nearest town. They're having a little bit of an issue where the windmill doesn't work, and that's a problem because, the mill grinds the grain, it takes care of the food for the town, and, this being an RPG, you do the heroic thing and you go fix the windmill. Along the way, you discover this magic sword, which you take back to town, and they identify it as the Sword of Wind. It's one of 4 legendary blades. You must be a hero of legend, and you're only going to cause trouble, so get out of town. They send you on your way to the next quest. And you run through a whole bunch of this stuff, and slowly your memory comes back, and you realize that you're actually a scientist from 100 years in the past when humanity almost ended life on the planet in a nuclear war that just destroyed everything, and what it didn't destroy, it mutated into horrible, monstrous forms, giving us this real fantasy world feeling, even though it's just alterations to contemporary, animals. So you have like these anthropomorphic, upright talking or walking, stalking tiger men that are all around trying to get you, or the traditional fantasy game slimes. And you battle your way through. You find the other 3 magic swords. Along the way, you encounter an evil empire. That's the reason that you were woken up, because as you discover, there's this flying tower in the sky of legend, and it's actually a mobile weapons platform that you helped build 100 years ago before going into cryostasis as a failsafe to make sure that the human race never became warlike again, so that they couldn't end the world a second time in nuclear fire. And of course, 100 years of cryosleep has gotten you to rearrange your principles a little bit, so you're not about to kill everybody just because one nation is full of assholes. So you go through a bunch of different things trying to find the artifacts that'll get you up to the flying tower. You join a scrappy little rebellion, and indirectly are the cause of that scrappy little rebellion getting nuked. Well, not actually nuked, but slaughtered by Dragonian soldiers and so on down the line. And it's just this big, grand, epic, sweeping adventure, and I love it so very, very much. It's easily in my top 5 games. The controls for this game are really tight. It's a top-down action RPG from the NES era. The D-pad moves you. The one button attacks, the other button does magic spells or makes you jump.
That popped up on its own, so sorry.
You really can't ask for much more than that. It does have some minor issues with hitbox detection in certain segments of the game, but it's an old NES game. They had that. It just kind of increases the challenge. It doesn't make it unplayable. There's a little bit of tactical involved. Each of the swords has an elemental base, and so do each of the monsters in the game that you encounter. And if you hit something with the wrong element, it's completely immune. So you may get to an area where you haven't found the right elemental sword yet, and you can't hurt anything. Again, it doesn't make it unplayable. It just makes it more challenging. Your stalking and sneaking and dodging skills become invaluable. It's a very pretty game. It is 8-bit, so it does look a little dated and retro because it is dated and retro, but it holds up nicely. It's very pretty. It's very colorful. It's got a sort of a distinct art style. The color palette for the hero has this lovely shade of purple in this character design that I've never quite seen anywhere else. It's very, very distinctive. I hesitate to say iconic again because this is a cult classic. It never really took off, which is unfortunate. But it's instantly recognizable. You see this guy in that purple outfit, and it's like, oh, it's that guy from that game. There's no mistaking him for anything else. The only thing that even comes close is there was another game on the Game Boy Color, Magi Nation, that had an art style that's very similar, but I don't believe that was intentional. I think it just happened that way. And it doesn't use the same color palette. As far as the musical selection, the music in this game is fantastic. It's catchy, it's sprightly, it has that sort of adventurous, let's go, let's do stuff feel to it. It's really memorable. I mean, I'm still humming the music from this game 28 years later. I know Spoonie has played a little bit of this game, hasn't finished it, but I'll catch him humming it now and again. It's very catchy, it's very authentic feeling, it's phenomenal. The game did have one little interesting quirk in that your sprite, actually all of the sprites, the hero and all of the monsters, move a little bit faster than other characters had done at the time. If you played something like The Legend of Zelda or Final Fantasy or even Pokemon when it first came out, there's this peculiar plotting gait that's sort of... It's just a given for any sort of an RPG where you're moving through an overworld. And it kind of moves on that 4/4 time, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. Crystalis didn't do that. They sped both the hero and the monsters up considerably. And because of that, the whole game feels like it's at a much faster pace. It feels a little more frantic. You're a little bit more at the edge of your seat during combat, simply because, stuff is moving faster and you just get that feel of things are happening, and it works really well, and I love that. As a cult classic, this game was popular enough that they did do and by they I mean Nintendo with SNK's blessing, did a re-release, a remastering, I guess, would be the way to phrase that, in 2000, actually June 26th, 2000, on the Game Boy Color. And this is supposed to be the definitive version because the original game is unfinished. The Nintendo Entertainment System cartridge just wasn't long enough, or it wasn't powerful enough, didn't have enough memory to fit the whole game. The end result is that they had to condense, they eliminated the final dungeon, they rearranged the final boss fights to give a different sort of, basically a different ending from what was originally intended due to the limitations of the system and the memory that they had. The Game Boy Color didn't have that same issue, didn't have those same restrictions. So they were able to put in that final dungeon. They were able to rearrange the final boss fight the way it was meant to be. And they made a few other minor changes. First one of my big complaints is that they completely rescored the entire piece. It's got a fully orchestrated soundtrack now, and it just doesn't sound as nice as the old Nintendo MIDI music. It's not nearly as memorable. They changed the beginning, so instead of, being as this guy out of this cave with amnesia who may or may not be a troublemaker, you are this prophesized hero of legend, which changes the entire tone of the game, where you're, instead of just being this heroic wandering mercenary vagabond, you're, the legendary hero because we have to be a Zelda clone. But most importantly, it changed the ending. So the floating tower at the end is no longer this fail-safe from 100 years ago where people were afraid that we were going to, continue to be warlock, where people were afraid we were going to continue to be warlike and maybe, end existence as we know it and destroy the only habitable planet we have. Instead, it's just sort of a mobile Death Star ripoff for the evil empire of Drionia. And that takes a lot of the oomph away from it. It just eliminates the whole message of nuclear holocaust and all that from the past and takes away a lot of the game's history and subsequently just takes away a lot of the game's character and a lot of what made an individual. So the Game Boy Color game is out there, but it's kind of inferior story-wise. It's also inferior in terms of the Game Boy's processing abilities. It had more memory, it could process things faster, but it also had reduced resolution because of the cramped, tiny little screen, which meant that the viewable portion of the map, right over the character, was much smaller. It didn't draw out as far as the original one had on the NES. So a lot of the times you'd have monsters that you couldn't see on the screen that were way off to your left, just like it were a third-person over-the-shoulder game, that are blindsiding you and attacking you that you can't dodge because you can't see the monster or where it's aiming. So all in all, overall, the Game Boy Color, which isn't easy to find, it's a rare title in and of itself, thank goodness, is not worth... I mean, if you've never played Crystalis, it's worth doing, I guess, but if you can find the NES version, which it's on the Nintendo eShop, go get it. It's, you know, it's much better to get the original version than it is to do the remaster. Not that I don't hope for another re-release or a remaster at some point in the future, or even like a follow-up. You know, let me know what happened to these characters that I got so attached to as a kid. But I don't see that happening. So yeah, like I said, one of my favorite games, right up there in my top 5, and I strongly recommend that you go out there and get that. I don't often give a game 5 out of 5. I do give this, well, the original NES version from 1990, a 5 out of 5. Go out, give it a try. And with that, good night and good gaming. Hey guys, it's Vegorax here. If you like what you just saw, go ahead and give us a little thumbs up down below. If you really liked it, leave us a comment. We love feedback. And if you really liked it, click that little bell over in the corner and subscribe so you can hear everything that we have to say and do. Also, you can keep up with us on Facebook, link in the description below.